My name is Claire and I am 32. As a forensic accountant in Chicago, my entire career is built on finding hidden truths and exposing frauds. But the biggest fraud of all was living right inside my own home. Last week, I stood by my mother's casket, completely shattered by grief. The solemn silence of the funeral home was broken by my ringing phone. It was my husband, Ryan. When I accidentally answered on speakerphone, his voice echoed across the room. "Are you going to cry there all day? Put me before your mom. Come to my family summer kickoff barbecue in an hour. My boss is here." I froze, but my father stepped up, his face like stone, and whispered a plan that would destroy my husband's life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Subscribe if you have ever had to teach a narcissist a lesson they will never forget. To understand that phone call, you must know my mother Eleanor, who battled cancer for 2 years. My father Thomas, a retired federal prosecutor, and I did everything to make her comfortable while I balanced hospital visits with analyzing corporate financial crimes. Ryan, on the other hand, treated my mother's illness as a personal inconvenience. Ryan is 34 and a senior public relations executive. Everything in his world revolves around optics, status, and networking. When we first met 5 years ago, I thought his charm was intoxicating. But once we got married, the mask slipped. His narcissism seeped into every corner of our lives. If I had a major deadline, he would suddenly have a crisis that required my immediate attention. If I received a promotion, he bought an expensive car we did not need. As my mother's condition worsened, Ryan's lack of empathy became glaringly obvious. He stopped coming to the hospital, claiming the sterile environment depressed him and stifled his creativity. He spent evenings networking at downtown bars, preparing to launch his public relations firm. He constantly complained about the cost of my mother's treatments, even though I managed our finances and paid for her care using a dedicated escrow account. On the morning my mother passed away, I was holding her hand. I called Ryan, openly sobbing, needing my husband to hold me. His response was a heavy sigh, followed by a complaint about how he would have to cancel his golf outing. I spent the next few days in a blur, organizing the quiet memorial service alongside my devoted father. The day of the funeral was a bleak, rainy Thursday. The service was held at a beautiful historic chapel in the suburbs of Chicago. Friends, extended family, and my father's former legal colleagues filled the pews. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and quiet sorrow. I stood near the front wearing a simple black dress, my eyes swollen from crying. My father stood perfectly straight beside me, offering a quiet strength that kept me from collapsing entirely. Ryan was nowhere to be found. He had left the house early that morning, claiming he had an unavoidable meeting with a potential investor that would only take an hour. He promised he would be at the chapel before the service began. As the priest concluded the final prayer and guests began to file past the casket to offer their condolences, the seat next to me remained empty. The absence was humiliating, a glaring neon sign pointing to the cracks in my marriage. Nia, my sister-in-law, approached me. She is married to Ryan's younger brother, Kyle. Nia is an incredibly sharp civil rights lawyer, a proud African-American woman who has always seen right through Ryan's superficial charm. She hugged me tightly. "I am so sorry, Claire," she whispered. "And I am sorry about Ryan. He is a coward for not being here today." I simply nodded, lacking the energy to defend him anymore. Just as the last few guests were offering their sympathies, my phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. The sudden noise was jarring in the quiet chapel. I fumbled to silence it, assuming it was a work emergency or a misplaced alarm. But when I pulled it out, Ryan's face flashed on the screen. My hands were shaking so badly from exhaustion and grief that when I swiped the screen to answer, my thumb accidentally hit the speaker button. Before I could bring the phone to my ear, Ryan's voice blasted through the room, distorted and aggressive. "Are you going to cry there all day?" The words echoed off the vaulted ceilings, freezing every person in the room. I gasped frantically, trying to turn off the speaker, but my fingers would not cooperate. "Put me before your mom!" Ryan shouted, his tone dripping with irritation. "You have been obsessing over her for months and she is gone. You need to get over it and come to my family summer kickoff barbecue in an hour." My boss is here and it looks pathetic that my wife is not by my side playing host. The silence in the chapel became absolute. Dozens of guests turned to stare at me, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and outrage. I stood there utterly paralyzed, the phone burning like a hot coal in my hand. My husband was demanding I abandon my mother's casket to serve appetizers to his boss. My father stepped up beside me. Thomas is a man who spent 40 years putting away organized crime bosses. He rarely raises his voice, but his presence commands absolute authority. His face was stone cold, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He reached out and gently took the phone from my trembling hand, ending the call without saying a word. He turned to me, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, icy resolve. Let us give him exactly what he wants, he whispered. I stared at my father, shock giving way to icy clarity. We walked out of the chapel. The heavy oak doors shut behind us, thrusting us back into the harsh reality of the rainy afternoon. My father guided me toward his sedan. We did not stop to change out of our mourning attire. There was no time, and I had no desire to accommodate the visual comfort of the man who had desecrated my mother's funeral. The rain beat a rhythmic drum against the windshield as my father navigated toward the affluent northern suburbs. My father, a former prosecutor, waited to strike. I saw him calculating the exact legal weight of what would unfold. The drive took 40 minutes. As we turned onto the tree-lined avenue where Ryan's family estate was located, the atmosphere shifted drastically. Luxury vehicles lined the manicured street. The thump of pop music vibrated through the air at odds with the sorrow anchoring my chest. Ryan's parents lived in a massive stone mansion designed for entertaining corporate elites. We parked a block away and walked toward the noise. My black heels clicked against the wet pavement. My father walked beside me with the steady pace of an executioner. We walked through the wrought iron gates and stepped onto the expansive patio. The contrast was violently jarring. Vibrant floats bobbed in the crystal blue pool. Waiters circulated with silver trays of expensive appetizers and cocktails. Guests laughed loudly, completely absorbed in their networking and superficial conversations. Someone stopped mid-laugh, her champagne flute lowering, as her eyes locked onto our black mourning clothes. The sudden stillness spread like a contagion. One by one, heads turned. Conversations abruptly died. Someone killed the music, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging over the yard. We stood there like twin specters of grief invading a festival of excess. The crowd parted and Brenda Ryan's mother marched toward us. She wore a bright floral dress, a heavy gold necklace catching the sunlight. Her face, however, was twisted into a mask of absolute fury. She did not offer any condolences or ask how the funeral went at all. Instead, she stopped 2 feet in front of me, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss that carried across the unnervingly quiet patio. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Brenda demanded, her eyes darting nervously toward the important guests. "You show up here looking like the Grim Reaper. This is a celebration for my son. You are bringing bad energy and death into my home. You are deliberately trying to ruin this event." I stared at my mother-in-law, the sheer audacity temporarily paralyzing my vocal cords. She cared more about the aesthetic vibe of her party than my buried mother. Before I could formulate a response, Ryan pushed his way through the crowd. His face was flushed red, a mixture of alcohol and barely contained rage. He wore a crisp light blue polo and expensive khaki shorts, the picture of summer corporate success. He locked his furious gaze entirely on me. Ryan closed the distance, his fingers closing around my upper arm with a bruising, desperate grip. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered through gritted teeth. He yanked me away from my father and Brenda, marching me aggressively toward the estate's massive commercial kitchen. My father made a slight movement to intervene, but I caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. Let him hang himself, I thought. Ryan dragged me into the kitchen, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind us, cutting off the staring eyes of his guests. The kitchen was empty, the caterers having stepped out to the patio. Ryan released my arm with a violent shove that sent me stumbling back against the marble island. "Are you completely insane?" Ryan shouted, pacing the length of the kitchen. "My boss is out there. The senior partners are out there. I told you to come here and support me, and you show up looking like you crawled out of a grave." Do you have any idea how embarrassing you are? I steadied myself against the cool marble looking at the man I had married. I just put my mother in the ground, Ryan. I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the tears he expected. You demanded I leave her casket. You screamed at me on speakerphone in front of everyone at the chapel. Ryan scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were complaining about a minor inconvenience. She is dead, Claire. She does not care where you are. But my career is alive and my promotion is on the line today. I needed you to put on a nice dress, slap on a smile, and charm the managing partners. Instead, you drag your father here to play the victim and humiliate me in front of the people who write my paychecks. You are trying to destroy my life because you cannot handle your own emotions. He stepped closer, his finger pointing aggressively, inches from my face. You are going to go upstairs to the guest room right now. You will borrow my mother's dress, fix your face, and come back out to apologize to everyone for causing a scene. If you ruin this promotion for me, Claire, I swear to God you will regret it. His narcissistic rage was a physical force in the room. He truly believed his corporate networking event superseded the fundamental human decency of mourning a parent. He saw me not as a grieving daughter or even as his wife, but as a defective accessory, failing to perform its designated function. I looked down at my black dress, then back up at his flushed, furious face. I did not cry. I did not scream back. The forensic accountant, inside me, simply locked away every piece of emotional attachment I had left for him, calculating the exact cost of the debt he was about to incur. I maintained my silence, letting his words hang in the sterile air of the commercial kitchen. My lack of a reaction infuriated him further. Ryan thrived on dramatic apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. When I offered him nothing but a cold stare, his face contorted. He stepped forward again, closing the meager distance between us until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. He raised his hand, pointing a rigid finger so close to my eyes that I had to blink. You are nothing but a liability to me right now, he sneered, his voice dropping low. I have spent the last 2 years putting my life on hold while you played nursemaid to a dying woman. Do you know how much networking I missed? Do you know how many dinners I had to skip because you were too depressed to function? My grief is an inconvenience to your career trajectory. I stated, my voice completely devoid of inflection. That is what you are saying. Yes, he spat back, his hand coming down to grip my shoulder tightly. This was a physical manifestation of his emotional abuse. I am building an empire, Claire. I am securing futures. You are dragging me down into your pathetic misery. If you cannot pull yourself together and be the wife I need today, then maybe I need to rethink this entire marriage. He leaned in closer, his grip bruising my collarbone. He was delivering the ultimate emotional slap, trying to shatter whatever fragile pieces of my heart remained. He wanted me to break down, to fall to my knees and beg him not to leave me on the very day I buried my mother. The silence stretched tight and dangerous. As he waited for tears, none came. My mind categorized everything. Suddenly, the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen burst open. The loud chatter and pulsing music from the patio flooded the room for a split second before the doors swung shut again. Footsteps clicked sharply against the tile floor. Step away from her, Ryan. The voice was calm, melodic, but laced with absolute razor-sharp authority. Ryan froze, his fingers instantly unclenching from my shoulder. We both turned to see Nia standing a few feet away. Nia was married to Kyle, the younger brother of Ryan. She was a brilliant civil rights attorney, an African-American woman navigating treacherous waters. I knew she endured endless subtle racism and passive-aggressive microaggressions from Brenda at every family gathering. Brenda loved to make backhanded compliments about her demanding career, but Nia always handled it with a terrifyingly polite smile that made Brenda look foolish. Right now, Nia was not smiling. She wore a tailored emerald green sundress that commanded attention, but it was her eyes that held the power. She deliberately inserted herself physically between us. She did not raise her hand, but her posture was a barricade. Ryan took a step back, suddenly looking like a scolded child. This is private, Ryan muttered, adjusting his collar and trying to regain his arrogant posture. It looked like an assault, Ryan. Nia corrected smoothly, her gaze tracking the red marks forming on my skin where his fingers had dug in. And if you ever put your hands on her like that again, I will personally see to it that your boss, your partners, and the local police receive a detailed account of the incident. Are we clear? Ryan scoffed, running a hand through his styled hair. He looked nervously toward the kitchen doors, terrified that someone important might walk in and witness this. You are both acting crazy, he deflected using his favorite tactic. I was just trying to calm her down. She is hysterical. She is grieving, Nia stated flatly. Something you clearly know nothing about. Now get out there and entertain your investors. Leave Claire alone. Ryan glared at me one last time, a silent promise of retribution, before pushing past Nia and storming out through the swinging doors. The heavy thud of the doors closing felt like a pressure valve releasing. I let out a slow, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. Nia turned to me, her fierce expression softening instantly. She walked to the industrial sink, grabbed a glass from a drying rack, and filled it with water. She brought it over to me, her movements deliberate and calming. Drink this, she instructed softly, pressing the cool glass into my hands. You are shaking. I took a sip, the cold water grounding me slightly. Thank you, I whispered quietly. I did not expect anyone in this house to step in. Nia leaned against the marble island beside me, crossing her arms. We both watched the kitchen doors for a moment silently. I have been watching this family operate for 5 years, Claire, she said quietly. I see how Brenda treats me, and I see how Ryan treats you. They are emotional vampires. They feed on control and appearances. Today is a new low even for him. I gripped the glass tighter. He wants to divorce me because I am ruining his networking event today, I said, stating the absurd reality of my marriage out loud. Nia shook her head, a dark, knowing look crossing her features. It is not just about the networking event, Claire. There is something else going on. Something you need to look into immediately. I frowned, the forensic accountant in me instantly snapping to attention at her tone. What do you mean? Nia glanced toward the doors again, then stepped much closer to me, lowering her voice until it was barely a whisper. Check your joint trust account. Ryan just bragged to Kyle about securing a $500,000 seed investment for his new public relations firm. I stared at her, the numbers tumbling through my head. If Ryan had $500,000, he forged authorization to drain the medical escrow funds of my mother. If Ryan had $500,000, he forged authorization to drain the medical escrow funds of my mother. The sheer magnitude of that betrayal slammed directly into my chest. Those funds were explicitly set aside for her final hospice care and outstanding hospital bills. We had liquidated her modest retirement assets just to ensure she died with dignity. Ryan had complained endlessly about the cost, but I never imagined he would stoop to outright theft while she took her final breaths. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. The forensic accountant inside me rapidly calculated all the timelines. He needed a massive injection of capital to launch his firm, and he had access to my laptop when I was sleeping at the hospital. Nia watched the realization wash over my face. I could see the profound empathy in her eyes mixed with a fierce, unspoken solidarity. We did not need to exchange another word. I gave her a curt nod of immense gratitude. She had just handed me the weapon I needed to dismantle my husband. I turned and pushed through the heavy swinging doors, stepping back into the glaring sunlight of the patio. The music was still pulsating loudly. I scanned the crowd and immediately spotted my father. He stood near the edge of the pool, watching Ryan, who was currently holding court by the massive outdoor kitchen flipping stakes, and laughing loudly with 2 senior partners from his firm. Ryan looked completely at ease, the picture of the charismatic, successful executive playing the perfect host. He had already forgotten the bruises he left on my shoulder. I walked over to my father slowly. He did not turn his head as I approached. He knows, I said to him, my voice barely a whisper yet carrying the weight of an incoming storm. Nia told me everything. He drained the medical escrow account. He took her cancer funds. My father did not flinch. His jaw tightened just a fraction. He had spent his entire career prosecuting white-collar criminals. Now he was looking at one who had infiltrated his own family. Let us proceed, he said quietly, his voice carrying the chilling authority of a federal courtroom. I have the document ready. He reached inside his tailored black suit jacket and withdrew a thick, sealed legal envelope. We had discussed this preemptive measure days ago when he first suspected Ryan's financial instability. We just needed the right moment, the perfect intersection of Ryan's greed and his desperate need to impress his superiors. Now knowing Ryan had stolen the medical funds, the trap was not just necessary, it was ultimate justice. My father and I walked together toward the outdoor kitchen. The crowd parted slightly, the stark contrast of our morning attire making the guests uncomfortable. Ryan saw us approaching. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he plastered on an expression of performative concern. Thomas, Ryan said loudly, ensuring the senior partners could hear him. Claire, I am so glad you both felt up to joining us today. Celebrating life is what Eleanor would have wanted. The hypocrisy was absolutely staggering. My father stopped in front of the grill, his presence instantly dwarfing Ryan's manufactured charisma. Ryan, my father said, his tone perfectly neutral. I apologize for interrupting your networking event. However, my late wife left specific instructions regarding her estate that require our immediate attention. Ryan wiped his hands on a towel. Surely legal matters can wait until Monday morning, Thomas. We are hosting right now. My father shook his head slightly. This pertains to the early inheritance advance Eleanor arranged for you and Claire. The tax deadlines are stringent. The funds are ready to be dispersed into your accounts by tomorrow morning, but the transfer requires your immediate signature on the release forms today. Delaying until Monday means forfeiting the current tax quarter advantages. I watched the exact moment greed overrode Ryan's annoyance. The words inheritance advance triggered a visible physical reaction. His pupils dilated slightly. The arrogant slant of his shoulders shifted forward with sudden, desperate interest. He was currently swimming in stolen money, trying to launch a firm, and the promise of a massive legitimate cash injection was too intoxicating for his narcissistic ego to ignore. I desperately wanted to show his senior partners exactly how wealthy and successful he was. Of course, Ryan said quickly, tossing the towel onto the counter. If Eleanor wanted this handled immediately, I am happy to oblige her wishes. Where do I need to sign? My father handed him the thick envelope. Ryan tore it open with eager fingers, pulling out a multi-page legal document. He did not ask to call his lawyer. He did not excuse himself to a quiet room to read the fine print. His ego convinced him he was the smartest man in the yard, untouchable and victorious. He walked over to a luxury sports car parked near the edge of the patio, slapping the documents down on the polished hood. My father handed him a heavy silver pen. Sign the last page and initial the two preceding addendums, my father instructed smoothly. Ryan skimmed the top page, his eyes catching only the bolded financial figures my father had strategically placed there to distract him. He did not read the dense legal jargon beneath them. He flipped directly to the back. With a flourish of arrogance, he scribbled his signature across the bottom line and hastily initialed the addendums. He handed the pen and the papers back to my father with a triumphant smirk. Done, Ryan said. Thank you, Thomas. Tell the bank I will look for the transfer tomorrow. My father slid the documents back into the envelope, securing it inside his jacket. I will ensure everything is processed exactly as you authorized, he said. The double meaning hung in the air, undetected by my truly narcissistic husband. My father and I left quietly. My father and I walked back to his car in absolute silence. We did not need to celebrate our small victory. The trap was set, but the real work was just beginning. He dropped me off at the marital home Ryan and I shared. The house was completely dark. Ryan was undoubtedly still at the barbecue, playing the grieving but resilient executive, probably soaking up the sympathy of his senior partners. I knew he would not be home for hours. His narcissistic ego required an audience, and he would drain every last drop of attention from that party before stumbling home drunk. I quickly locked the front door, walked past the living room, and entered my home office. I closed the blinds tightly and turned on a single desk lamp. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and booted up my primary workstation. As a forensic accountant, my daily life involved untangling complex webs of corporate deception, tracking offshore accounts, and finding the digital footprints that white-collar criminals thought they had erased. Ryan considered himself a mastermind of public relations, a manipulator of narratives, But he was breathtakingly arrogant when it came to digital security. He truly believed superficial encryption could hide his sins. I connected my laptop to a secure virtual private network. I needed to move quickly and leave absolutely no trace on our home router that I had accessed his personal server. Ryan kept a secondary laptop in his briefcase, but his cloud storage synchronized automatically with the desktop in our shared study. I bypassed his initial password lock with ease. He used the same variation of his college fraternity letters and birth year for everything. Narcissists rarely change their passwords because they cannot fathom anyone daring to challenge their authority. Inside his local drive, I deployed a specialized data extraction tool used for corporate audits. It allowed me to clone his entire financial directory without triggering any access alerts. The progress bar crawled across my screen. Every percentage point gained felt like a ticking clock. If Ryan walked in, the confrontation would escalate. I needed cold, hard data. The massive download eventually completed. I disconnected from his drive and opened the cloned files in my secure sandbox environment. I began running cross-referencing algorithms, searching for anomalies between our joint accounts, his personal business accounts, and the medical escrow fund. Nia had mentioned a $500,000 seed investment. I traced the outgoing wires from my mother's cancer treatment account. Ryan had systematically drained the funds through a series of escalating transfers over the past 4 months, categorizing them as experimental medical expenses and private nursing fees. But the destination routing numbers did not belong to any hospital or medical provider. They routed to a limited liability company registered in Delaware. I pulled the public corporate registry data for the entity. The sole proprietor listed on the corporate charter was Brittany. Brittany was Ryan's 24-year-old executive assistant. She was a recent graduate who constantly hovered around him at corporate events, hanging on his every word. I opened Ryan's personal expense folder matching dates and times against the corporate card receipts he thought he had deleted. The deleted items folder is the first place a forensic accountant looks. I recovered dozens of invoices. Luxury hotel suites in downtown Chicago booked on nights he claimed he was working late. Expensive dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. Designer jewelry purchases, categorized as client retention gifts. He was not just cheating on me with his assistant. He was funding her entire lifestyle and capitalizing a new business venture for her using the money meant to keep my mother comfortable in her final days. A cold, methodical rage settled into my bones. I kept digging, running a secondary audit on our marital assets. If Ryan was reckless enough to steal medical funds, his financial depravity did not end there. I pulled the property records for our home from the county database. We had purchased the house 5 years ago, putting down a substantial deposit from my own savings. We owned a significant amount of equity. The county registry showed a massive lion placed against our property just 3 weeks ago. Ryan had taken out a second mortgage, borrowing heavily against the equity of our home. He had extracted $400,000 in cash. I immediately accessed the digitized loan documents attached to the county file. The paperwork required both of our signatures. I zoomed in on the signature line above my printed name. The handwriting was a surprisingly accurate forgery of my signature, looping and precise. But I had never seen this document in my life. I looked at the notary section. The stamp belonged to a notary public whose license number I quickly ran through the state verification database. The license had been revoked 2 years ago for fraudulent activity. Ryan had hired a corrupt notary to rubber stamp a forged signature, legally binding me to a massive debt without my knowledge. I had stolen from my dying mother to fund his mistress, and he had stolen my home to fund his delusions of grandeur. He had financially gutted me completely while demanding I play the supportive, smiling wife. The audacity was almost magnificent in its cruelty. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. The document Ryan had signed at the barbecue earlier today suddenly felt like the most powerful weapon in the world. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was just a grieving, hysterical woman he could easily discard. He had no idea that he had just handed a forensic accountant the exact evidence needed to trigger a federal investigation. I saved every file, every forged signature, and every fraudulent wire transfer onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I shut down the computer just as I heard the heavy thud of a car door closing in the driveway outside my window. Ryan was home. The heavy thud of the front door echoing through the quiet house signaled his arrival. I sat frozen in my home office chair, the darkness wrapping around me like a protective shroud. His footsteps were uneven, dragging slightly against the hardwood floors of the hallway. He was drunk, undoubtedly coasting on the adrenaline of his successful performance at the barbecue. I could hear him humming a cheerful tune, a sound so utterly grotesque, given that we had buried my mother mere hours ago. While his footsteps moved toward the kitchen, my mind raced back to the digital evidence I had extracted. Finding the Delaware Shell Company and the forged mortgage was a massive victory. But as a forensic accountant, I knew tracing the source of the stolen funds was only half the battle. I needed to document the exact impact of his embezzlement on my mother's final days. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my encrypted work tablet. The screen cast a pale light across my face as I booted it up. I bypassed the local network and connected directly to a secure hotspot. I needed to cross-reference the outgoing wire transfers with the billing statements from the hospice care facility. When my mother was first diagnosed, I established a dedicated medical escrow account. I funded it by liquidating her retirement savings and adding my own annual bonuses. I had entrusted Ryan with the administrative access. I logged into the patient billing portal for the hospice center. The digital ledger loaded, displaying months of itemized care invoices. I opened the file side by side with the cloned records of the Delaware Shell Company owned by Brittany. What I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. The betrayal was profoundly, unforgivably cruel. During the final 2 months of my mother's life, her pain levels had escalated dramatically. The hospice doctors had strongly recommended upgrading her to a specialized palliative care protocol, which included a dedicated overnight nurse and advanced pain management therapeutics. I remembered sitting in the dim hospital room, holding her frail hand, assuring her that we had more than enough money in the escrow account to cover whatever she needed to be comfortable. I had instructed Ryan to authorize the upgrade immediately. Looking at the portal now, I saw the absolute truth. The request for the upgraded pain medication had been officially denied by the account administrator. Ryan had logged into the portal, clicked decline on the specialized care package, and flagged it as an unnecessary expenditure. My mother had spent her final weeks in agonizing pain because my husband decided her comfort was too expensive. My eyes darted to the right side of the screen, matching the dates. On the exact same Tuesday that Ryan denied the overnight nurse and the advanced pain medication, he initiated a wire transfer from the medical escrow account. The amount he transferred to Brittany's Shell Company was the precise dollar amount the hospice had requested for the upgraded care package. He literally stole my mother's pain relief to fund his mistress. I dug deeper into the Delaware entity. I pulled the incorporation filings and the commercial real estate leases attached to the company profile. Brittany had registered a boutique agency named Ascend Public Relations. Ryan had always complained about working under the senior partners at his current firm, constantly boasting that he could run his own empire. He was using his assistant as the legal face of a company he capitalized with stolen cancer funds. I found the commercial lease agreement for Ascend Public Relations. They had secured a premium corner office suite in a high-rise building downtown. The security deposit and the first 6 months of rent had been paid in full via a cashier's check. I matched the routing numbers perfectly. The deposit was funded by the exact transfer Ryan made the week my mother was moved to the terminal ward. He was buying designer office furniture and panoramic city views, while my mother was crying in pain. A sudden crash from the kitchen snapped me out of my digital investigation. I heard the sound of breaking glass, followed by a string of muttered curses. Ryan was stumbling around, likely looking for another bottle of scotch to celebrate his flawless execution of the grieving son-in-law routine. I quickly powered down the tablet and slipped it back into the hidden compartment of my desk. Claire Ryan shouted from the kitchen, his voice slurred and aggressive. "Are you hiding in here?" I remained perfectly still, regulating my breathing. The door to the study swung open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Ryan stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the hallway lights. His tie was loosened, his expensive shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He leaned against the doorframe, swaying slightly, a half-empty bottle of expensive whiskey clutched in his right hand. "Sitting in the dark like a psycho," he sneered, taking a sloppy swig from the bottle. "You really outdid yourself today, Claire. You humiliated me in front of the managing partners. They all think my wife is completely unhinged." I looked at the man who had stolen my mother's peace. I did not feel sorrow. I did not feel the urge to scream. I felt the cold, calculating precision of a woman who was about to dismantle an entire life. He thought he was untouchable and brilliant. He was deeply, fundamentally mistaken. "I am grieving Ryan," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat, completely devoid of the emotional reaction he craved so desperately from me tonight. "I will not ever apologize to anyone for mourning my mother." Ryan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the small room. "You are completely unstable, Claire. You have lost your grip on reality. Go to Human Resources tomorrow morning and request a psychiatric leave of absence before I make you do it. I will not let you drag me down." He turned on his heel and stumbled out of the study, leaving a trail of spilled whiskey across the floor. I listened to his heavy footsteps ascend the staircase, followed by the aggressive slam of the master bedroom door. The house finally fell silent, but my mind was operating at maximum velocity. I remained in the dark, meticulously reviewing my plan. His narcissistic rage blinded him to consequence. He assumed I was broken, paralyzed by grief. He had no idea I was a forensic accountant who had just cataloged his financial and moral destruction. My objective for the next morning was clear. I needed to reach my office, access the secure portals, and freeze every asset before he could move another cent. I packed my encrypted flash drives into my leather briefcase and prepared for war. The morning commute was a blur of gray skies. I arrived at the towering glass and steel skyscraper of my financial firm precisely at 7. The lobby was empty, echoing with the chime of the elevators. I walked straight to my department. The bullpen was quiet. I entered my office, locked the door, and powered up my monitors. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. To freeze the accounts, I needed to initiate a fraud alert. It was a severe protocol that would immediately flag the accounts for federal review, but it was the only way to halt his embezzlement. I opened the encrypted portal, inputting the first string of routing numbers. My pulse thrummed, a steady beat against my wrists. I was seconds away from severing his financial lifeline forever. A sharp knock on the glass shattered my focus. I looked up to see Meredith, the senior director of human resources, standing outside my door. Her expression was tight, a mask of corporate neutrality, signaling danger. I locked my screen and opened the door. "Good morning, Meredith. I am right in the middle of a critical audit. Can this wait?" Meredith shook her head, her eyes avoiding direct contact. "I am sorry, Claire. We need you in conference room B right now. It is an urgent personal matter." My stomach dropped. The phrase personal matter in an HR context was never a positive development. I grabbed my briefcase and followed her down the corridor. We approached the opaque frosted glass of conference room B. Meredith opened the door and gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside and the breath instantly left my lungs. Sitting at the long mahogany table was Ryan. He wore a navy suit, his posture projecting deep sorrow. Beside him sat an older man holding a leather portfolio. This man exuded a rehearsed clinical authority. Standing near the window was the managing partner of my firm, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I stood frozen in the doorway. Ryan had brought the battlefield directly to my sanctuary. "Claire, thank God," Ryan said, his voice breaking with a masterclass display of manufactured emotion. He stood up, reaching out a hand as if to comfort me. "Please sit down. We are all here because we love you." I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if it were toxic. I looked at the managing partner. "What is going on here? Why is my husband in a restricted corporate area?" The managing partner cleared his throat nervously. "Claire, your husband reached out this morning. He expressed some very severe concerns about your well-being following the tragic loss of your mother. We have a duty of care to our employees, and we felt it was necessary to facilitate this intervention." Intervention. I repeated the word, tasting like ash. The older man in the tweed jacket stood up, offering a patronizing, gentle smile. "Claire, my name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I am a psychiatric specialist consulting with your husband. Ryan came to me in a state of profound distress. He detailed your recent behavior, your extreme insomnia, the sudden personality shifts, and your inability to separate reality from grief. I stared at this fraudulent doctor, the realization hitting me with the force of a freight train. Ryan was not just trying to embarrass me. He was actively attempting to discredit my sanity entirely before I could speak out. If he could prove I was mentally unstable, any accusations of embezzlement or fraud I made against him would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a grieving daughter. It was a preemptive strike of magnificent evil. I am perfectly fine, I stated, gripping the handle of my briefcase. I am a senior forensic accountant executing my job. My husband is lying to you because we are having marital issues. Ryan buried his face in his hands, producing a stifled, tragic sob. See, he whispered, his voice trembling perfectly. The paranoia is escalating. She thinks everyone is plotting against her. She spent last night sitting in the dark muttering about stolen money and conspiracies. She is completely detached from reality, doctor. I am terrified she is going to harm herself or compromise this firm. Dr. Thorne turned to the managing partner with a grave expression, adjusting his glasses slowly. Severe psychosis, triggered by profound grief, is not uncommon. The paranoia she is exhibiting, specifically regarding financial conspiracies, is a classic manifestation of her professional background, twisting her perception of reality. She requires immediate intensive psychiatric intervention before she does irreparable damage to her life or your corporate infrastructure. I watched the managing partner's face shift from discomfort to outright alarm. Ryan was leveraging the firm's fear of liability against me. If they believed I was a paranoid liability, they would strip my access to the financial networks immediately. The exact networks I needed to freeze the stolen funds. He had outmaneuvered my timeline. I stood in the center of the room, entirely surrounded by the trap my husband had sprung, realizing that speaking the truth right now would only confirm the very delusion he had engineered. Every denial I offered would simply be documented as a symptom of my madness. Meredith shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting between Ryan and the managing partner. Ryan pressed his advantage, reaching into his tailored jacket to withdraw a thick manila folder. He placed it gently on the mahogany table, treating it like a fragile explosive. I brought documentation, Ryan whispered, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. I did not want to do this, but I found these printouts on her desk at home. She has been running unauthorized audits on your top-tier clients, downloading sensitive corporate data onto unencrypted personal drives. I stared at the folder. He had staged my home office. He planted fabricated evidence to make my legitimate forensic investigation look like a manic illegal data breach. The managing partner reached for the folder, flipping through the pages. The color drained from his face. These are highly classified portfolio summaries, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Claire, if you are downloading client data outside of our secure servers, that is a massive violation of compliance protocols. I kept my hands clasped tightly in front of me, digging my nails into my palms to anchor myself to reality. The data was fabricated, I stated, maintaining a perfectly level tone. I have never breached corporate compliance. My husband is presenting falsified documents to sabotage my employment because I uncovered his financial embezzlement last night. Dr. Thorne shook his head sadly, writing a quick note on his legal pad. The projection of guilt, Dr. Thorne murmured to the room. When the mind cannot process its own fracturing reality, it invents an external threat. In this case, she has cast her devoted husband as a criminal mastermind. It is a textbook trauma response. She genuinely believes the narrative her broken mind has constructed. Ryan wiped a non-existent tear from his cheek. I just want my wife back, he choked out, looking pleadingly at the managing partner. But until she gets the psychiatric help she needs, she cannot be trusted with financial responsibilities. I am terrified she will liquidate her mother's life insurance payout or transfer her assets to some scam artist. That is why I am meeting with my attorneys this afternoon. I have no choice but to petition the state for a medical conservatorship. I have to step in and take legal control of her estate to protect her from herself. The word hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Conservatorship. The absolute suspension of my legal autonomy. He was not just trying to steal the money my mother left behind. He was trying to strip me of my fundamental rights as an adult. He wanted to cage me in a legal prison where he controlled every cent to my name, every medical decision, and every movement I made. If he succeeded, he could funnel the life insurance directly into Brittany's shell company, and I would be powerless to stop him. Meredith finally spoke, her human resources training kicking into high gear. Claire, given the severity of these allegations and the documentation your husband has provided, the firm cannot ignore this risk. We have a fiduciary duty to our clients. We are placing you on immediate mandatory administrative leave. Unpaid leave, the managing partner added quickly, eager to distance the firm from any potential liability. Pending a full internal investigation into these alleged data breaches and a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation clearance. You must surrender your access badge, your corporate phone, and your laptop right now. They were neutralizing my only weapon. Without corporate network access, I could not officially freeze the accounts he was draining. I looked at Ryan. A microscopic, triumphant smirk played at the corner of his mouth, visible only to me. He had orchestrated a flawless corporate assassination. If I screamed, I proved his point. If I cried, I validated the doctor's diagnosis. The only way to survive this room was to exhibit chilling, undeniable compliance. I slowly reached into my pocket and extracted my security badge. I placed it gently on the table next to the fabricated folder. I unclipped my corporate phone from my belt and set it beside the badge. Finally, I placed my briefcase on the table, popping the latches. I removed the firm laptop, setting it squarely in front of Meredith. I did not hand over the encrypted flash drives hidden in the secret lining of the briefcase. Those contained the real evidence, the digital ammunition I needed for the war ahead. I understand your position, I told the managing partner, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of the hysteria they expected. You are acting on the information presented to you. I will comply fully with the administrative leave. Dr. Thorne frowned, clearly unsettled by my rapid de-escalation. He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned my gaze entirely to Ryan. The coldness in my eyes made him physically flinch. Enjoy the promotion, Ryan, I said softly. I snapped my briefcase shut and turned toward the door. Meredith stood up immediately. Corporate policy dictates that security must escort you from the premises, Claire. I am sorry, but we have to follow protocol. I did not argue. I stepped out of the conference room and waited in the corridor. Two burly security guards arrived moments later, their faces sympathetic but stern. As they escorted me toward the elevators, I glanced back through the frosted glass of the conference room. Ryan was shaking the managing partner's hand, playing the role of the tragic, dutiful husband to perfection. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the view of my former life. I rode down to the lobby in total silence. The security guards flanked me as I walked out the revolving glass doors and onto the bustling Chicago street. The cold wind whipped against my face, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. I was entirely cut off from my professional resources, facing a massive federal data breach investigation and racing to prevent my husband from seizing legal control of my very existence. I hailed a taxi the moment my feet hit the concrete. I had to reach the house before Ryan finished his victory lap. My encrypted flash drives held raw data, but the physical servers hidden in my home office contained the unalterable metadata necessary to prove the mortgage forgery. If he filed for a conservatorship today, he would gain immediate authority to seize and destroy every piece of hardware. I watched the gray skyline blur past, calculating the minutes I had left. The taxi dropped me off at the edge of our driveway. I briskly walked up the paved pathway, gripping my briefcase. I pulled my house keys from my pocket and slid the brass key into the front door deadbolt. It jammed. I tried again. It refused to turn. I tried the lower handle lock. Nothing. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm. I moved to the keypad for the garage entry and punched in the access code. A harsh red light blinked back at me. He had wiped the system protocols. He had changed the locks. The sheer coordination required to pull off this total physical lockout meant he had planned this execution for weeks. The heavy oak front door suddenly swung open. Ryan stepped out onto the porch. He had beaten me home, rushing back to guard his stolen fortress. He stood there in his crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking infuriatingly relaxed. But he was not alone. A young woman stepped out from behind him, wrapping her arm possessively around his waist. Brittany. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled and she wore a smug, victorious smile. Dangling carelessly from her left shoulder was my vintage designer bag, the limited edition piece I had purchased to celebrate passing my certification exams. "You really should not be here, Claire," Ryan said, his voice dripping with fabricated pity. "This property is now a protected asset under the pending conservatorship filings. My attorneys advised me to secure the premises to prevent you from damaging marital property during your mental health crisis." I stood at the bottom of the porch steps. I simply analyzed the situation. They wanted me to beat my fists against the door to cry and beg, providing ring camera footage they could hand directly to a judge to prove my instability. Brittany looked down at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You look exhausted, Claire," Brittany sneered. "You really need to check into a psych ward and get some rest. Ryan told me all about your delusions. It is honestly just sad. Let us take care of the house and the finances. You just focus on getting your mind right." She patted my designer bag, a visual taunt designed to break my composure. She was wearing my home, carrying my bag, and spending my dying mother's money. "You are trespassing," Claire, Ryan added. "If you do not leave my property right now, I will call the police and have you removed. A police report will just expedite the medical hold I am filing this afternoon. Go get help. We are done here." I memorized the sheer, unfiltered arrogance deeply etched into both of their smiling faces today. They had completely locked me out of the physical servers, foolishly believing they had severed my only ability to fight back against them. They did not realize that a forensic accountant always builds redundancies. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter a single word of protest. I offered them nothing at all. I simply turned on my heel and walked away. I walked down the driveway with measured steps. The rain dampened my hair, but I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hard resolve. I reached the sidewalk and continued walking until the house was out of sight. They had won the battle of the morning, but they fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the war. I pulled out my personal cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. The line rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. "Thomas here." "Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Claire," my father responded immediately, sensing the shift in my tone. "Has he made his move?" "Yes." "Yes," I replied. "He ambushed me at the firm with a fraudulent psychiatrist. I have been placed on administrative leave. He changed the locks on the house and his mistress is standing on my porch carrying my belongings. He is filing for a medical conservatorship this afternoon to seize legal control of the estate and block the embezzlement investigation." When my father finally spoke, the retired federal prosecutor had fully emerged. His voice was sharp, commanding, and dangerous. "Do not go back to that house," my father instructed. "I am dispatching a car to your location right now. Give me your exact cross streets. We are enacting the contingency protocols." He thinks he has cornered you legally, but he just crossed federal lines by engaging the corporate systems with fraudulent intent. I gave him my location. "I am bringing the encrypted flash drives," I told him. I extracted the routing numbers, the shell company documents, and the forged mortgage signatures before he locked me out of the corporate portal. "Good girl," my father said. "Ryan wants to play legal games. He has no idea what kind of fire he just walked into. Stay put. We are going hunting." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. The rain began to fall much harder, soaking through my thin coat, but the bitter cold did not bother me anymore. I stood on the street corner waiting for my father's black car to arrive, my mind methodically compiling all the federal statutes Ryan had just violated. I had lost my job, my home, and my marriage in a matter of hours today. But as I firmly clutched the heavy leather briefcase containing the undeniable digital evidence that would absolutely secure his federal indictment, I had never felt more powerful. The black town car arrived within 10 minutes. I slid into the back seat, shivering but focused. We drove toward my father's residence in the northern suburbs. His home was a heavily fortified compound surrounded by stone walls and a state-of-the-art security system. As a former federal prosecutor who spent decades dismantling organized crime, my father designed his space for absolute security. I stepped through the heavy mahogany front doors and walked directly into his study. The room felt like a command center. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with legal volumes. A massive oak desk dominated the room, flanked by encrypted monitors. My father stood by the window watching the rain lash against the glass. He turned as I entered, his sharp eyes scanning my face for any sign of emotional collapse. He found none. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the surface of his desk and popped the brass latches. I pulled out the 3 encrypted flash drives and lined them up precisely. "Here is the digital ammunition," I stated clearly. My father booted an air-gapped computer tower, ensuring our data review remained completely invisible. I plugged in the drive and displayed the files extracted from Ryan's server. I showed him the medical escrow portal first. My father's jaw clenched as I explained how Ryan deliberately declined upgraded pain management therapeutics for my mother. Corresponding wire transfers proved Ryan funneled those exact funds into a Delaware shell company owned entirely by his assistant Brittany. The silence grew dense. My father did not shout. His anger was a freezing force that manifested as absolute stillness. "We will ensure the federal government dismantles his entire existence," my father said quietly. "Show me the rest." I opened the property records displaying the forged second mortgage documents. Ryan used a fraudulent notary to borrow $400,000 against our home equity. "He thinks he trapped me," I explained. "By staging that fake intervention and locking me out, he believes my ability to fight back is paralyzed. He assumes a medical conservatorship gives him legal authority to seize the life insurance and cover up this fraud." My father leaned forward, offering a slow, predatory smile that changed the energy in the room. "He thinks he is playing corporate chess," my father said softly. "We are playing federal prosecution." He walked over to a heavy steel safe concealed behind a framed map, entering a biometric sequence to swing the door open. He withdrew the sealed legal envelope presented to Ryan at the barbecue yesterday. Placing it directly in front of me, he instructed, "Open it." I slid the documents out. It was the paperwork Ryan eagerly signed, blinded by the promise of an early inheritance advance. Reading the dense legal text, my eyes widened. This was not an inheritance document. It was a masterfully drafted acknowledgement of debt and total indemnification agreement. "By signing this," my father explained, "your husband claimed sole personal responsibility for the fraudulent second mortgage attached to your property." The document states the signatory acknowledges acquiring the debt without consent and willfully assumes the entire financial burden. He indemnified you completely. I stared at the hasty, arrogant signature Ryan executed without consulting an attorney. He signed it because he was greedy, I realized aloud, the brilliance of the trap washing over me. You told him there was cash waiting to be dispersed, and his narcissistic ego prevented him from admitting he needed to read the fine print in front of his senior partners. Precisely, my father confirmed with a nod. Narcissists always operate under the delusion that they are the smartest person in the room. He thought he was securing a massive cash injection to fund his new public relations firm. Instead, he legally severed your assets from his impending financial ruin. If he defaults on that fraudulent loan, the bank cannot touch your personal accounts, your future earnings, or the life insurance policy your mother left you. He firmly wrapped the noose around his own neck. I looked at the document again, feeling a profound sense of relief and power. "He locked me out of the house this morning," I said, thinking of Brittany standing on my porch with my designer bag. "He told me the property was a protected asset under his conservatorship filing." "Let him have the physical house for now," my father said smoothly. "He is aggressively guarding a property that is carrying a massive, toxic debt he is now solely responsible for paying. When the federal investigators uncover the origin of those funds and the forged notary seal, the bank will seize the property, and he will carry the entire default on his personal record." We spent the next 3 hours mapping out the legal battlefield. My father printed large structural diagrams, pinning them to a corkboard across the room. We charted the flow of stolen money from the medical escrow account to the Delaware shell company. We linked the dates of his luxury hotel stays with Brittany to the forged corporate expense reports. Every piece of data I had extracted was transformed into a weaponized exhibit for a federal grand jury. "You are safe here, Claire," my father assured me as we finalized the timeline. "He cannot touch you in this house, and his conservatorship threat will evaporate the moment we present this evidence to a federal judge. We have built an airtight fortress around your assets and your freedom. Now we just need to let him get comfortable. I looked at the intricate web of evidence covering the wall. My husband thought he had orchestrated the perfect corporate assassination, leaving me homeless, unemployed, and legally powerless. I was completely unaware that he had just signed his own financial death warrant. I smiled while carefully looking at the digital evidence. I am ready for the next phase, I told my father, my voice echoing with absolute certainty in the quiet study. We are going to let him celebrate his victory. The next morning brought a fragile, deceptive calm to the city. I sat in a secluded corner booth of an upscale coffee shop located just outside the financial district. The ambient noise of espresso machines and hushed business meetings provided the perfect acoustic cover for a covert operation. I ordered a black coffee and waited, keeping my eyes fixed on the heavy glass doors. 10 minutes later, Nia walked in. She wore a stunning charcoal trench coat, exuding the effortless, sharp authority that made her such a formidable civil rights attorney. She scanned the room, spotted me, and slid into the leather booth opposite mine. We did not hug or exchange pleasantries. The stakes were far too high for casual socializing. You look remarkably composed for a woman whose husband just tried to have her committed. Nia observed, her voice low and steady. My father and I have been busy, I replied, simply taking a sip of my coffee. I appreciate you taking the risk to meet here today. Nia removed her leather gloves and placed them neatly on the table. It is not a risk when you know exactly how arrogant the enemy is, she stated. Nia leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded absolute attention. You and I have always operated on the periphery of this family, Claire. But while Ryan just treated you as an inconvenience to his career, Brenda and Ryan have been actively campaigning to remove me from Kyle's life for years. I listened closely. I knew Brenda was awful, but Nia was about to pull back the curtain on the deepest rot within their family dynamic. Brenda cannot stand that her youngest son married a strong, independent black woman who refuses to play the role of the grateful, subservient daughter-in-law. Nia explained, her tone laced with a cold, refined anger. She makes her little comments at every holiday dinner. She constantly asks Kyle when he is going to find a wife who wants to stay home and focus on traditional family values. And Ryan is her primary accomplice. I nodded, fully understanding the toxic environment she navigated. Ryan hates anyone who challenges his superiority, I said. You intimidate him because you are genuinely brilliant, and he is just a fraud in a tailored suit. Precisely, Nia agreed. Ryan actually offered to introduce Kyle to some younger, more agreeable women at his public relations firm. They thought I was oblivious. They thought because I kept a polite smile at family gatherings, I was not quietly documenting every single move they made. She reached into her designer handbag. I watched her movements carefully. You asked me yesterday to check your joint trust account, because you already knew what I would find, I stated. Nia offered a sharp, confirming smile. But I also knew you needed to discover the medical escrow theft yourself to understand the sheer magnitude of his depravity. Nia placed her closed fist on the table between our coffee cups. She slowly opened her fingers, revealing a sleek silver flash drive resting on her palm. I did not just document their microaggressions, Nia whispered, pushing the drive across the polished wood toward me. I looked at the small metal device. What is on this drive, Nia? She leaned back in her booth, crossing her arms with an air of absolute triumph. Ryan frequently leaves his secondary laptop open on the kitchen island when he visits Brenda's house for their Sunday strategy sessions. He is so blinded by his own narcissism that he never utilizes basic security protocols around family. Last month, while Brenda was busy lecturing me about my fashion choices, I mirrored his hard drive. This flash drive contains his fully decrypted internal corporate emails. My heart accelerated. What exactly did you manage to capture? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Everything, Nia replied smoothly. You will find extensive email chains between Ryan and his assistant Brittany. They detail the exact methodology he used to falsify expense reports at his public relations firm. He has been billing his senior partners for luxury hotel suites and personal vacations, masking them as client retention events. But that is just the beginning. I waited, holding my breath. Nia continued, her eyes gleaming with righteous justice. You will also find his direct correspondence with the fraudulent notary who forged your signature on the second mortgage. He explicitly instructed the notary via corporate email to backdate the stamp and ignore the dual signature requirements. He used company servers to commit federal wire fraud and forge banking documents. It is a display of digital incompetence. I picked up the silver flash drive, feeling the weight of the evidence it contained. He used corporate networks to facilitate the theft of my home and the embezzlement of my mother's medical funds, I stated, confirming the legal reality. Yes, Nia confirmed. Which means his firm is now inadvertently liable for hosting criminal activity on their servers. When the federal investigators see these emails, they will not just indict Ryan. They will raid his entire public relations firm. He is going to lose his job, his freedom, and his precious reputation all at once. I slipped the drive into the hidden pocket of my briefcase. You are handing me the final nail for his coffin, I said, looking at her with profound respect. Why give this to me instead of submitting it yourself? Nia smiled, a genuine expression of solidarity. Because you are the forensic accountant, Claire. You know how to package this data so that the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation cannot ignore it. And quite frankly, I want to watch you burn his empire to the ground. Brenda and Ryan thought they could quietly push me out of this family because I did not fit their bigoted, elitist aesthetic. They are about to learn that you never corner two intelligent women and expect them to simply surrender. I finished my coffee and watched Nia stand up, her emerald coat catching the ambient light of the cafe. We exchanged a single decisive nod before she walked out, disappearing into the bustling Chicago morning. I remained in the booth for exactly 5 minutes, ensuring our departures were staggered before stepping out into the biting wind. The silver flash drive burned like a beacon in my pocket. I flagged down a taxi, directing the driver back to the heavily fortified northern suburbs. The ride felt entirely different than my previous journeys. I was no longer a victim, a hostile corporate ambush, or a locked marital home. I was a specialized financial investigator, returning to base with the final pieces of a devastating puzzle. I arrived at my father's stone compound and moved directly into his study. He was standing by the massive corkboard, rearranging the structural diagrams we mapped out the previous night. I walked over to his heavy oak desk and placed the silver flash drive right in the center of the polished wood. My father looked at the small device, his sharp eyes narrowing with intense focus. Nia delivered the corporate archives, I announced. We have his fully decrypted internal correspondence, including his direct instructions to the fraudulent notary and his falsified expense reports. My father offered a slow, appreciative smile. He pulled up his chair and booted the secure, air-gapped computer tower. We are about to turn a messy divorce into a spectacular federal indictment, he stated, inserting the drive. For the next 6 hours, the study became a masterclass in forensic legal preparation. The room smelled of dark roast coffee and laser printer ink. I sat at my designated workstation running data extraction algorithms on the new email files, while my father cross-referenced my findings against the federal penal code. The sheer volume of Ryan's arrogance was staggering. He utilized his public relations firm's secured network to transmit the forged mortgage documents, mistakenly assuming his corporate encryption shielded him from scrutiny. He explicitly detailed his plans to funnel the stolen cancer funds into the Delaware Shell Company, coordinating the deposits with his young assistant. I synchronized the timestamps from his emails with the bank transfer receipts I pulled from the medical escrow portal. As I mapped the digital routing paths on the secondary monitor, a glaring anomaly caught my attention. The numbers did not just flow from the local Illinois bank to the Delaware registry. I traced the digital packet headers attached to the wire transfers. Ryan. I called out, my voice tight with sudden adrenaline. Look at the server routing sequence on these medical fund transfers. My father walked over, leaning heavily over my shoulder to inspect the monitor. I highlighted the server bounce locations. To hide the origin of the stolen money, Ryan routed the electronic transfers through a third-party payment processor. That processor is headquartered and operates its primary servers in New York, I explained, tapping the screen. The money left Illinois, bounced through New York, and settled in Delaware. My father straightened up, the seasoned federal prosecutor instantly recognizing the monumental weight of this discovery. Interstate wire fraud, he breathed the words carrying a lethal finality. By routing the stolen funds across state lines through the New York servers, Ryan elevated this entire situation. This is no longer a localized embezzlement case or a civil dispute over marital assets. This is a severe federal felony. He used telecommunications crossing state boundaries to execute a financial crime. My father walked briskly back to the corkboard, grabbing a thick red marker. He drew a hard line connecting the three states. The Federal Bureau of Investigation now has absolute jurisdiction, he declared. And because he failed to declare these embezzled funds as income, the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division will tear his boutique firm apart. The entire landscape of our retaliation shifted into the highest possible gear. We were no longer fighting a domestic battle over a stolen house. We were drafting a comprehensive federal prosecution packet. We spent the remainder of the evening meticulously packaging the evidence. Every document had to be perfect, requiring no leaps of logic for the federal agents who would soon review them. I created a master index cataloging the forged mortgage signatures, the denied hospice care receipts, the shell company incorporation papers, and the damning corporate emails. I printed out the financial flowcharts color-coding the interstate wire transfers to highlight the explicit federal violations. My father took my indexed reports and drafted the accompanying legal memorandums. He leveraged his decades of experience to format the dossiers exactly how a federal task force prefers to receive actionable intelligence. He wrote with brutal objective clarity, removing any trace of familial connection or emotional bias. The resulting documents read like a clinical autopsy of a financial predator. We compiled two identical massive binders. The first dossier was bound in stark black, destined for the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The second dossier, bound in dark blue, was prepared specifically for the special agents at the Internal Revenue Service. I watched my father seal the heavy binders into tamper-evident envelopes. Ryan believed he silenced me by orchestrating that fake psychiatric intervention at my office. He thought locking me out of my own home and threatening a medical conservatorship rendered me completely powerless. He assumed I was currently wandering the city broken and hysterical. Instead, I spent the day sitting in a fortified bunker, working alongside a former federal prosecutor to hand-wrap his entire existence for the United States government. My father placed the sealed dossiers inside his secure safe, locking the heavy steel door. We were fully armed and ready to strike. The biometric keypad chirped, signaling the evidence was locked away until the designated hour of our strike. Now, we just needed to trigger his ego and wait patiently. The legal trap was now set for his ultimate destruction. The following morning dawned crisp and cold. Sunlight pierced through the heavy drapes of my father's study, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the mahogany desk. We had spent the night finalizing the federal dossiers, but those binders were purely for the authorities. To ensure Ryan remained completely oblivious to the incoming strike, I needed to orchestrate a distraction so massive, so incredibly flattering to his ego, that he would gladly march himself right to the slaughterhouse. The threat of the medical conservatorship was his ultimate trump card. He wanted to strip me of my legal autonomy and cage me. I needed to convince him his terrifying tactic had worked flawlessly. Narcissists operate on a predictable behavioral loop. They demand absolute submission. If they believe they have crushed your spirit, they stop looking for traps because they cannot fathom a broken victim possessing the intellect to fight back. I opened my personal laptop and accessed an untraceable email client. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had to write the most humiliating, pathetic message of my entire life. I had to become the exact version of the broken, hysterical woman he had described to the managing partners. My father stood near the window, sipping dark coffee, watching me quietly. I began to type. "Ryan, please. I am begging you." The words felt like swallowing glass, but I pushed through the initial revulsion. "I am so tired, Ryan. Everything is falling apart. and I cannot fight you anymore. The human resources meeting yesterday broke whatever was left of me. You win. You were right about my mental state. I cannot handle a legal battle and I am terrified of the conservatorship. Please do not lock me in a medical facility. I just want peace. I just want to grieve my mother and then disappear completely. I paused, ensuring every sentence dripped with submission. If you drop the conservatorship petition and agree to a fast, uncontested divorce, I will walk away. Keep the house. Keep the primary accounts. I will sign an expedited settlement taking only 10% of our shared assets. That will be just enough for me to rent a quiet apartment and get the extensive psychiatric help you said I need. Please, Ryan, just let me go quietly. Let the lawyers draw up the rapid settlement today. I will sign whatever you want. I read the draft aloud to my father. He nodded slowly, his eyes calculating the legal ramifications of the bait. It is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, he observed, setting his coffee cup down on the windowsill. You are handing him an unconditional surrender, wrapped in total validation. He gets the house, the vast majority of the financial accounts, and the ultimate proof that he was right all along. His towering ego will absolutely blind him to the danger. I clicked send. The digital packet flew across the city landing, directly in the inbox of a man who believed he had conquered the world. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my leather chair. Now we had to wait. If Ryan possessed even a fraction of common sense, he would forward that email to his aggressive divorce attorneys. A competent lawyer would immediately question why a senior forensic accountant was suddenly willing to forfeit 90% of her marital estate without a fight. A competent lawyer would demand a full asset discovery phase, which would inevitably uncover the forged mortgage and the stolen cancer funds. But Ryan was definitely not a competent lawyer. Ryan was a public relations executive drunk on stolen money. I knew he would view consulting his legal team as an unnecessary delay. He wanted the immediate visceral rush of dominating me. He wanted the house legally secured in his name before his grand corporate gala this weekend. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. I paced the length of the study, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. My father remained perfectly still, a silent anchor in the room. Exactly 42 minutes later, my phone vibrated against the desk. I stopped pacing. I walked over and picked up the device. A new email notification illuminated the screen. The sender was Ryan. I opened the message. His response was incredibly brief, dripping with the toxic, condescending arrogance I expected from him. Claire, I am glad you are finally seeing reality. This is the best decision for your mental health. I am instructing my legal team to draft the expedited uncontested settlement immediately based on your 90-10 split offer. We will meet at the mediation office tomorrow at noon. Do not be late and do not make a scene. I stared at his reply. I took the bait completely. He did not ask a single question about the math. He did not even pause to consider why a woman whose mother just died would happily hand over the keys to her sanctuary. He saw an open door to absolute victory and sprinted right through it. I handed the phone to my father. My father read the screen, a chilling smile touching his lips. He is rushing the paperwork, my father noted, his voice laced with dark satisfaction. By signing an expedited settlement, he legally binds himself to the estate as it currently stands. He takes the house, but he also formally assumes all hidden liabilities attached to it. He is locking himself in the cage. I sat back down at the desk, feeling a surge of pure icy adrenaline. Ryan thought he was arriving at a mediation room tomorrow to collect the spoils of his masterful emotional warfare. He thought he was walking away with a luxury home and a terrified, defeated ex-wife. He had absolutely no idea he was scheduling an appointment to legally claim ownership of a massive, heavily documented federal crime scene. The psychological trap had snapped shut with flawless precision. We were finally ready for the mediation room tomorrow morning. Our ultimate victory was now guaranteed. The morning sun reflected off the glass exterior of the downtown mediation center. We rode the elevator in silence. My father carried a single briefcase. I wore a gray cardigan, deliberately looking exhausted and defeated. The receptionist guided us into a massive conference room featuring panoramic views of the Chicago skyline. Ryan was seated at the mahogany table flanked by two attorneys. They looked unbothered, whispering quietly. Ryan sat in the center, exuding absolute triumph. I wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking like a man preparing for a magazine shoot rather than a divorce settlement. When we walked in, he offered a look of manufactured pity. I kept my eyes focused firmly on the table, perfectly playing the shattered woman he demanded. The mediator, a stern woman with silver hair, took her place and opened her laptop. "We are here to finalize an expedited, uncontested dissolution of marriage," the mediator announced. "Both parties have waived the standard discovery period in favor of an immediate settlement based on a proposed 90-10 asset division. I confirm both parties are entering this willingly." "Yes," Ryan answered immediately, projecting practiced sincerity. "I simply want what is best for Claire. She needs to focus on her recovery right now. Prolonging this process would only exacerbate her mental health struggles. I am willing to shoulder the financial burden so she can find peace." I felt a sickening twist in my stomach at his flawless performance, but I forced myself to nod meekly. "Yes," I whispered, keeping my gaze lowered. "I just want it to be over." Ryan's lead attorney slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table. "This is the comprehensive settlement agreement," he stated casually. "My client assumes full ownership of the marital residence joint investment portfolios and primary checking accounts. Your client retains her personal savings account, representing 10% of liquid assets, and waives spousal support." We expedited the drafting process. My father pulled the documents toward us and began reviewing the pages. He did not read them with the aggressive scrutiny of a defense attorney. He read them to ensure Ryan had not omitted the assets about to destroy him. He flipped to the property division addendum. There it was in clear black ink. Ryan was formally assuming total ownership and liability for the marital home. My father looked up from the paperwork, playing his part in our synchronized theater. "Claire," he said softly, ensuring opposing counsel heard his defeat. "Are you absolutely certain about this? You are walking away from everything you helped build. Once this is signed, you forfeit any future claims." I looked at my father, then glanced nervously at Ryan. "Yes," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. "I cannot live in that house anyway. Too many memories. I just want to sign and leave." Ryan leaned forward, unable to suppress the predatory gleam in his cold eyes. "It is the absolute right choice, Claire," he murmured, attempting to sound comforting, but failing to hide his sheer greed. "You are doing the exact right thing." My father slid the paperwork back and handed me a pen. I took it with a trembling hand. I signed my name on the designated lines, my signature intentionally messy and rushed. I pushed the documents back across the table. Ryan did not wait for his attorneys to review my signatures. He snatched the pen from the table. His narcissism was vibrating off his skin. I was so desperate to legally claim the wealth he had stolen that he abandoned all caution. A competent lawyer would have insisted on an audit before allowing a client to assume total liability. But Ryan rushed them, and they happily collected fees for minimal effort. Ryan signed the bottom of the final page with a massive, arrogant flourish. He initialed the property addendums without reading a single word of the liability transfer clauses. He tossed the pen onto the table, leaning back with a theatrical sigh of relief. The mediator collected the documents, reviewing the signatures quickly. "I will file these with the county clerk this afternoon," she confirmed. "The dissolution will be official upon the judge's final stamp." We stood up. The tension instantly shifted from formal mediation to the awkward aftermath of a severed life. Ryan's lawyers packed their briefcases, discussing golf reservations. Ryan buttoned his suit jacket, walking around the table until he stood directly in front of me. He looked down with toxic, triumphant superiority. "Take care of yourself, Claire," Ryan said, his voice dropping low, so only I could hear the malice beneath the polite words. "Get the help you need. Do not try to contact me. My firm is expanding and I do not have time for past distractions." I looked up at him, dropping the facade of the broken woman for one fleeting second. My eyes were cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of fear. "I will not be contacting you, Ryan," I replied evenly. "You will be far too busy to take my calls." He frowned, confused by the sudden shift in my demeanor, but his ego dismissed it. He turned and walked out of the conference room, flanked by his attorneys. He stepped into the elevator completely convinced he had secured a luxury estate and a financial portfolio. My father and I remained in the empty conference room. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut, sealing us in silence. My father looked at me, a slow, dangerous smile breaking across his face. "He signed it," my father stated, pointing at the spot where the documents had been. "He legally assumed total ownership of a heavily defaulted, federally flagged asset portfolio." I grabbed my purse, the adrenaline finally rushing through my veins. The trap was locked. He had officially claimed the stolen money and the forged mortgage as his own property. "Let us go," I said, walking toward the exit. "He has a gala to prepare for, and we have federal agents to brief." His destruction was assured. 2 days later, the morning air in downtown Chicago carried a biting chill as my father and I walked up the limestone steps of the federal courthouse. The mediation documents had been processed with astonishing speed, pushed through bureaucratic channels by Ryan's attorneys, who were eager to close what they considered an effortless victory. They wanted the judicial stamp before the weekend. They wanted the estate locked down so Ryan could launch his public relations firm with absolute immunity. Their impatience was the greatest asset we possessed. We entered courtroom 4. The gallery was mostly empty. Ryan sat at the plaintiff's table, radiating manufactured confidence. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, projecting the image of a triumphant executive who had navigated a personal crisis. Brittany sat 2 rows behind him, failing to look inconspicuous. She wore a smug smirk, envisioning her future in the home she thought I had forfeited. I took my seat beside my father. I maintained the facade of a defeated woman. I kept my posture slumped, my hands folded in my lap, and my eyes fixed on the table. I did not look at Ryan, knowing denying him eye contact would fuel his belief in my psychological submission. The stern judge called our case. He reviewed the settlement documents, adjusting his reading glasses as he scanned the asset division clauses. "You are waiving your right to a comprehensive financial discovery period," the judge stated, looking directly at me. "You understand that by signing this agreement, you forfeit any future claims to the marital residence and the joint investment portfolios listed in Addendum B." I forced my voice to tremble slightly as I answered, "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. I just want this process to be over." The judge turned to Ryan. "And you accept total and sole liability for all assets and attached obligations outlined in this settlement." "I accept full responsibility," Ryan declared smoothly. "I want to ensure my ex-wife can move forward without any lingering financial burdens tying her to our past. I am prepared to assume all liabilities." My father and I exchanged a microscopic, silent glance. Ryan had just verbally confirmed his ownership of the massive fraudulent federal debt on the official court record. The judge nodded, seemingly satisfied with the mutual agreement. He raised his heavy brass stamp and brought it down hard on the final page of the divorce decree. The sharp, resonant crack echoed through the courtroom, signaling the absolute severance of our marriage. "The dissolution is granted," the judge announced, signing his name across the stamped seal. The documents were officially filed. Ryan had won the battle he invented, completely oblivious to the catastrophic war he had just lost. My father and I gathered our briefcases and walked out into the wide, marble-lined corridor of the courthouse. The polished floors reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. Before we could reach the elevators, rapid footsteps echoed behind us. "Claire, wait!" Ryan called out, his voice dropping the performed sorrow and adopting a sharp, malicious edge. I stopped and turned slowly. Ryan closed the distance, signaling his attorneys to go ahead. Brittany lingered a few paces back, her arms crossed, watching the confrontation with eager anticipation. Ryan stepped into my personal space, his tall frame attempting to physically intimidate me. He leaned in close, ensuring my father could hear every poisonous word. "I honestly cannot believe you gave up that easily," Ryan whispered, a cruel, mocking grin stretching across his face. "You just handed me $1 million estate because you are too mentally fragile to fight. You threw away everything we built because you could not handle reality." I looked at the man I had loved, the man who had stolen from my dying mother to fund his mistress. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "You are going to end up entirely alone," Claire Ryan continued twisting the metaphorical knife. You have no job, no husband, and no home. You are a bankrupt, hysterical failure. Go check yourself into a psychiatric ward before you end up on the street. Do not ever try to contact me for money when your savings run out. I did not flinch. I did not argue or attempt to defend my sanity. I simply let him exhaust his narcissistic supply. When he finally finished his vile monologue, I offered him something he had never expected. I smiled. It was not a sad, broken smile. It was a sharp, brilliant, terrifyingly confident smile that reached all the way to my eyes. Ryan froze, his triumphant sneer faltering as confusion clouded his features. I slowly lifted my left wrist, pulling back the sleeve of my gray cardigan to check my watch. The silver hands ticked toward the top of the hour. You have an empire to build, Ryan. I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying the pristine clarity of a forensic accountant who had just closed an airtight audit. I highly suggest you enjoy every single second of your victory gala tonight. He frowned, taking a hesitant step backward. What is that supposed to mean? He demanded, a flicker of genuine uncertainty finally breaching his arrogant facade. I did not answer his question. I turned my back on him, walking away with purposeful, measured strides. My father walked beside me, his presence a silent fortress. We pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the crisp Chicago air. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb. My father opened the door for me, and I climbed into the leather interior. As the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, I looked out the tinted window. Ryan was standing on the steps staring after us, his brow furrowed in sudden paranoid confusion. The legal severance was complete. The fraudulent assets were entirely in his name. The trap was officially armed, and the countdown to his absolute federal destruction had just begun. The evening descended upon Chicago. Downtown, the grand ballroom of the magnificent Palmer House Hotel glowed with the blinding radiance of stolen wealth. Ryan and Brittany were hosting the official launch gala for Ascend Public Relations. The sheer scale of the excess was physically nauseating to conceptualize. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light over towering ice sculptures carved into the company logo. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedo floor, balancing silver trays, laden with premium champagne and beluga caviar. Every silk tablecloth, orchid centerpiece, and drop of vintage liquor was purchased using money intended to ease my mother through her final days of terminal cancer. Ryan was literally throwing a lavish party on top of her grave. I monitored the event remotely, from the fortified safety of my father's study. Nia, forced to attend alongside her husband Kyle to maintain the facade of family unity, provided a steady stream of covert updates. She texted me descriptions of the grotesque spectacle unfolding in the ballroom. Ryan stood near the main stage wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than a reliable car. He held a microphone greeting local politicians and senior partners from his former agency. He beamed with the radiant, toxic confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire world. Brittany stood glued to his side, draped in a backless ruby-red designer gown. She wore a massive diamond pendant, her smile bright and completely hollow. They played the ultimate corporate power couple to absolute perfection. Brittany laughed at his jokes, batting her eyelashes at wealthy investors playing the brilliant young founder. Ryan played the supportive mentor and benefactor, loudly taking credit for securing her massive seed funding. He told everyone who would listen about his incredible prowess in venture capital, bragging about how he identified a gap in the market and capitalized on it. How was confessing to federal embezzlement in a room full of Chicago high society, disguising his felony as an entrepreneurial masterstroke. The arrogance of his performance was a spectacular sight, driven entirely by his inflated ego and complete lack of morality. However, the most vile performance of the evening belonged entirely to Brenda. Ryan's mother floated through the ballroom like a self-appointed queen, dripping in ostentatious jewelry and draped in a fur wrap. She held court near the champagne fountain, surrounded by the gossiping wives of the corporate elite. Nia stood a few feet away, sipping sparkling water and listening to every poisonous word falling from Brenda's lips. Brenda raised her flute, projecting her voice to ensure maximum visibility among her social circle. It is just such a profound relief, Brenda announced, her voice carrying a sickeningly sweet tone of manufactured victimhood. Ryan finally dropped the dead weight. The marriage was holding him back from his true potential. I always knew Claire was fundamentally unstable, but the way she completely lost her mind after her mother died was terrifying. She became utterly paranoid, accusing my son of the most ridiculous things. We actually had to hire a psychiatric specialist to intervene. Brenda sighed dramatically, placing a hand over her heart, as the surrounding women gasped in sympathy. I tried so hard to save her, Brenda continued, weaving her tapestry of lies. He offered to get her the best medical help, but she refused. She just walked away from everything. But honestly, it is a blessing in disguise. Look at what he has accomplished the moment he freed himself from her toxic energy. She gestured toward Ryan and Brittany. Brittany is just a breath of fresh air. She is ambitious, vibrant, and a much better fit for our family legacy. She actually respects my son. Nia texted me the exact quote. I read the words on my glowing phone screen sitting beside my father in his quiet study. Brenda weaponized my grief to elevate her son's social standing. She used my mother's death as a convenient plot device to justify Ryan's infidelity and financial crimes. They were all participating in a collective delusion, a shared narcissistic reality, where they were the flawless protagonists, and I was the hysterical, discarded villain. It was an echo chamber of wealth and deceit. I felt no anger reading Nia's messages. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm anticipation. They were celebrating in a house of cards built on federal wire fraud. Every photograph taken at the gala, every toast given, and every boastful admission regarding their seed funding was cementing their guilt. The gala was not a launch party. It was a massive, highly documented crime scene. Ryan had invited the most influential people in the city to witness his debut, entirely unaware he had just gathered an audience for his spectacular public execution. As the evening progressed, the music swelled and the alcohol flowed freely. Ryan took the center stage to deliver his keynote address. Nia recorded the audio from the back of the room, streaming it directly to my line. I listened to his smooth, practiced baritone echoing through the ballroom. We built Ascend Public Relations on transparency, integrity, and relentless innovation, Ryan proclaimed to the cheering crowd. This company represents the future of corporate communication. We are not just building a brand, we are building an empire based on absolute trust. The truly sickening irony of his spoken words hung in the air. He preached about integrity while standing on a stage financed by a dying woman's stolen comfort. He preached about transparency while hiding a fraudulent second mortgage and federal liability. He reached the absolute zenith of his narcissistic high, absorbing the applause, the admiration, and the envy of his peers. He had the house, the girl, and the money. He genuinely believed he had successfully achieved a total, complete, and irreversible victory over me and my entire family. I checked my watch, watching the silver hands move with mechanical precision. The time for quiet observation from the shadows was now officially and completely over. The time for quiet observation from the shadows was now officially and completely over. That morning, long before the crystal chandeliers were illuminated in the Palmer House ballroom, my father and I executed the most critical phase of our operation. We stood on the imposing concrete steps of the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. The wind whipped fiercely off the lake, but I felt impervious to the cold. I carried the two heavy binders, the black and the blue, containing absolute destruction of my husband. My father walked through the revolving doors with the effortless authority of a man returning to his kingdom. He spent 30 years walking these exact halls, prosecuting the most ruthless financial criminals in the Midwest. He bypassed the security desk, nodding to the armed guards who recognized him instantly, and waved us through the expedited lane. We rode the private elevator up to the highest floors, bypassing the standard bureaucratic channels entirely. My father was cashing in decades of accumulated goodwill and professional favors. He had called in a direct meeting with the United States Attorney and the lead regional director of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We entered a secure, soundproof conference room overlooking the sprawling cityscape. 3 individuals waited at the long oak table. I recognized Victor Evans, the current United States Attorney, whom my father had mentored a decade ago. Beside him sat two senior special agents from the Internal Revenue Service, their expressions intensely observant. Victor stood up immediately, offering my father a firm, respectful handshake. He gestured for us to sit. Thomas Victor said, his voice grave, "When you call my personal line at 6 in the morning and demand an emergency joint task force briefing, I clear my schedule." What exactly are we looking at today? My father did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He turned to me, offering a subtle nod of encouragement. I unclasped my leather briefcase and placed the two massive binders onto the center of the table. I slid the black binder toward Victor and the blue binder toward the senior tax investigators. "We are looking at a comprehensive multi-tiered federal fraud network," I stated clearly, projecting the clinical detachment of a seasoned forensic accountant. "The primary suspect is Ryan Preston, a senior public relations executive who is currently attempting to launder stolen funds through a newly formed corporate entity." I opened my encrypted tablet and connected it to the secure monitor mounted on the conference room wall. I began the presentation with the medical escrow account. I walked the federal agents through the tragic reality of my mother's terminal cancer and the dedicated funds I had set aside for her palliative care. The atmosphere in the room grew instantly heavy as I displayed the hospice denial forms side by side with the outgoing wire transfers. I demonstrated how Ryan deliberately blocked her pain management therapeutics to extract the exact corresponding dollar amounts. I tracked those stolen funds as they bounced through the third-party payment processors located in New York, explicitly highlighting the interstate routing numbers. "That establishes federal wire fraud jurisdiction," Victor noted, his eyes scanning the documents in the black binder. "The brazenness is startling. High used interstate telecommunications to embezzle medical funds from a dying woman." I continued the briefing, transitioning to the forged second mortgage. I displayed the county property records, bringing up the high-resolution scan of the fraudulent signature and the revoked notary stamp. "He illegally borrowed $400,000 against a marital asset without my consent," I explained, advancing to the next slide. The lead Internal Revenue Service agent leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the Delaware Shell Company Incorporation papers. She traced the flow of the stolen cash directly into Ascend Public Relations. "He capitalized this entire commercial lease and purchased all his operational equipment using embezzled, untaxed funds," she stated, her voice tight with professional outrage. "He never declared a single cent of this stolen income. That constitutes massive, deliberate tax evasion and blatant money laundering." I then delivered the final, most devastating piece of digital evidence. I activated the audio files and email archives Nia had successfully extracted from his unsecured secondary laptop. The room listened in absolute silence as Ryan explicitly instructed the fraudulent notary via his secured corporate email network. He detailed the exact methodology he used to falsify expense reports at his former agency, billing senior partners for luxury hotel suites. He used to entertain his mistress and co-conspirator, Brittany. By utilizing his corporate network to transmit these forged banking documents across state lines, he transformed a domestic dispute into a federal racketeering operation, my father added smoothly, folding his hands together on the table. He documented his own federal felonies on a corporate server. The federal agents sat back in their chairs, visibly stunned by the sheer, unfiltered stupidity of Ryan's actions. "Criminals usually attempt to obscure their digital footprints," Victor remarked, closing the black binder with a loud thud. "Your husband practically gift-wrapped his own indictment and provided a table of contents." The Internal Revenue Service agent turned to my father. "We have enough actionable evidence here to secure emergency asset freeze warrants and immediate arrest mandates. Where is the suspect currently located?" My father checked his watch, a predatory gleam flashing in his eyes. "Tonight, Ryan and his accomplice are hosting a massive, highly publicized launch gala for their fraudulent company at the Palmer House Hotel. They have invited the most prominent investors and corporate executives in the city to witness their debut." Victor looked at the tax agents, a mutual understanding passing silently between them. "A coordinated raid during a high-profile corporate event ensures we secure the suspects, the fraudulent assets, and the digital hardware simultaneously," Victor declared. He stood up, reaching for the office phone. I am mobilizing the tactical teams and securing the judicial signatures immediately. We are going to crash his party. The mobilization of a federal task force is a terrifyingly efficient spectacle to witness. Victor Evans did not simply make a phone call. He activated a heavily coordinated network of specialized agents who treated financial crimes with the exact same lethal urgency as physical threats. My father and I sat in the command center as the room transformed. Agents rushed in with secure laptops, establishing a dedicated encrypted network to monitor Ryan's bank accounts. The investigator took command of the whiteboards, pinning up the digital flowcharts I had generated earlier. The primary obstacle to securing immediate judicial approval for a nighttime raid was the burden of proof regarding flight risk. Federal judges do not typically authorize tactical incursions into high society galas without absolute justification. The lead agent pointed to the Delaware Shell Company on the board. The stolen medical funds are currently sitting in a highly liquid state, she explained to the rapidly assembling team. We are tracking a pattern of rapid unverified withdrawals. Brittany just authorized a massive wire transfer to an offshore vendor to pay for the exorbitant catering and floral arrangements at the Palmer House. If Ryan suspects this investigation, he can liquidate the stolen assets and transfer them to a non-extradition jurisdiction within 90 seconds using his smartphone. The money he embezzled from a dying woman will vanish completely. Victor nodded grimly, gripping a stack of printed affidavits. That is the exact leverage we need for the emergency judicial signatures, he declared. He left the command center to present our comprehensive forensic accounting portfolio directly to the duty judge. The waiting period was an agonizing stretch of heavy silence. I watched the digital clock on the wall tick forward, knowing that across the city, Ryan was likely adjusting his expensive tuxedo and rehearsing his keynote speech. He believed he was stepping into the brightest moment of his entire career, completely unaware of the federal guillotine currently lowering over his neck. My father stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, radiating a calm, predatory patience. He had orchestrated takedowns like this for decades, but I knew this particular operation carried a profoundly personal weight. We were not just securing an indictment, we were avenging my mother's stolen comfort. After 45 agonizing minutes, the heavy wooden doors of the command center swung open. Victor walked back into the room. He held 3 distinct, heavily stamped legal documents. He slapped them down onto the central conference table. Warrants granted, Victor announced, his voice slicing through the tension. The room erupted into localized, purposeful chaos. The tactical lead and agent wearing a dark windbreaker emblazoned with the Federal Bureau insignia took the floor. He pulled up a digital blueprint of the Palmer House Hotel ballroom. We are currently executing 3 simultaneous arrest warrants. The agent briefed the strike team, tapping the projected map. Primary target is Ryan Preston. Secondary target is Brittany, acting as the registered owner of the fraudulent corporate entity. Tertiary target is the physical premises of Ascend Public Relations itself, which we will lock down to seize all corporate servers, physical ledgers, and electronic devices. We move in tight, fast, and silent until we hit the ballroom doors. No one leaves the venue until the targets are secured and the digital assets are firmly in federal custody. My father and I excused ourselves from the federal building after the briefing concluded. Our role in the legal preparation was entirely finished. The execution now belonged to the government. But my personal role in this evening was just beginning. I took a secure car back to my father's estate to prepare for the gala. I was no longer the broken, weeping widow Ryan expected to see groveling at his feet. I needed to look like a woman who held absolute power. I walked into the guest suite and stripped away the gray, unassuming clothes I had worn to the courthouse. I opened the garment bag my father had arranged for me. Inside hung a sleek, impeccably tailored crimson-red evening gown. It was a dress designed for a conqueror. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision, highlighting the sharp angles of my face, masking any lingering exhaustion. I pinned my hair back into an elegant, severe style that left nothing to hide behind. I slipped into the dress, the rich fabric draping perfectly, projecting an aura of untouchable, ruthless confidence. I stepped in front of the full-length mirror. The reflection staring back at me was a forensic accountant who had successfully weaponized her grief. Ryan wanted me to disappear into a psychiatric ward. He wanted me to quietly fade into oblivion while he spent my mother's money. Instead, I was going to walk directly into the center of his fraudulent kingdom and watch the federal government tear it to shreds. I picked up my clutch and walked downstairs to the foyer. My father was waiting near the front door. He wore a classic black tuxedo, looking incredibly distinguished and dangerous. He checked his secure phone, reading a heavily encrypted message. The tactical teams are currently staging in the service elevators of the Palmer House, my father informed me, his voice thrumming with dark anticipation. The undercover agents are already positioned inside the ballroom monitoring the targets. They are waiting for our signal to breach the main floor. I took a deep breath, steadying the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The trap we had meticulously constructed over the past 72 hours was finally closing. Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, and every arrogant, narcissistic lie Ryan had ever told was about to collide with the absolute unforgiving reality of the federal justice system. The heavy mahogany doors of the estate opened, revealing the crisp, dark Chicago night. My phone suddenly vibrated in my clutch. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. A single two-word text message had just arrived from my father's secure federal contact. Green light. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my clutch. The operation was officially in motion. My father and I stepped into the waiting black car. The drive to the Palmer House Hotel took 20 minutes, but time stretched infinitely. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. For months, Ryan had dictated the narrative of my life. He made me the grieving burden, the paranoid wife, the hysterical obstacle to his grand ambitions. Tonight, I was the architect of his ruin. The car pulled up to the hotel entrance. Valets rushed forward to open the doors. My father offered me his arm, but I shook my head gently. This was an entrance I needed to make entirely on my own. I walked through the revolving doors and stepped into the breathtaking lobby. The opulent architecture, with its sweeping staircases and frescoed ceilings, perfectly mirrored the arrogance of the man I was about to destroy. I bypassed the elevators and walked up the grand staircase toward the Empire Room. The muffled sounds of a jazz quartet and hundreds of overlapping voices grew louder with every step. I reached the landing. Two massive oak doors stood between me and the gala. A hotel staff member in a crisp uniform reached for the brass handles, looking at my crimson gown with respectful admiration. He pulled the heavy doors open, and the brilliant blinding light of Ascend Public Relations flooded over me. I stepped over the threshold and walked right into the center of the room. I did not sneak in through the back or hover near the coat check. I walked directly into the blast radius of his stolen empire. At first, only the people standing near the entrance noticed me, but a red dress in a sea of corporate black and gray is a visual siren. Conversations abruptly halted. The sudden drop in volume caused the people next to them to turn and look. It was a fascinating domino effect. Within 30 seconds, the deafening roar of high society networking evaporated into an absolute suffocating silence. Even the jazz quartet faltered, the saxophone player lowering his instrument as the tension sucked the air out of the room. I stood perfectly still, my chin held high. I scanned the frozen crowd. I saw senior partners from my financial firm. I saw local politicians Ryan had courted. I saw Nia standing near the back, offering a subtle, razor-sharp smile of approval. Then the crowd parted, and I saw the royal family of this fraudulent kingdom. Brenda was standing near a massive ice sculpture. Her jaw actually dropped, and the champagne flute in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling expensive liquor onto her designer shoes. She looked at me as if a ghost had just materialized to drag her to the underworld. On the main stage, Ryan and Brittany were frozen mid-laugh. Ryan stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and immediate visceral fury. The narrative he had sold to this entire room was that I was a broken, psychotic woman, currently locked in a basement crying over my mother. Seeing me standing there radiating power and untouched by his abuse shattered his constructed reality. The shock quickly mutated into narcissistic rage. He practically shoved Brittany aside and stormed off the stage. His face flushed a violent, ugly shade of crimson. He marched through the parted crowd, his heavy footsteps echoing in the dead-silent ballroom. As he closed the distance, he snapped his fingers aggressively, signaling to two burly hotel security guards standing near the perimeter. He pointed a rigid finger directly at me. "Remove her." Ryan barked, his voice cracking slightly with panic. "Get her out of here right now. She is trespassing." The two guards exchanged a confused look, intimidated by my calm demeanor, but they began moving toward me anyway. Ryan reached me before they did. He stopped inches from my face, his chest heaving. "You psychotic, pathetic woman," he hissed, keeping his voice low enough to avoid echoing, but loud enough to be heard by the closest guests. "What do you think you are doing? I told you to check into a hospital. You signed the divorce papers. You have absolutely nothing left. You are embarrassing yourself in front of the most important people in Chicago." I did not take a single step backward. A waiter holding a silver tray of drinks had frozen perfectly still to my left. I calmly reached out, picked up a crystal flute of premium champagne, and brought it to my chest. Ryan's eyes darted frantically around the room, realizing his audience was watching his perfect facade crumble. "Security," he yelled, abandoning all pretense of the calm executive. "Grab her by the arms and throw her onto the street. She is having a mental breakdown. She is a danger to my guests." The guards stepped up, their hands reaching out to grab my shoulders. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or attempt to fight them off. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne. It was crisp cold and tasted like absolute victory. I lowered the glass and looked directly into Ryan's panicked, furious eyes. "I am not going anywhere, Ryan," I said, my voice carrying a terrifyingly pleasant conversational tone that sent a visible shudder down his spine. I looked around the lavish ballroom, admiring the expensive floral arrangements and the crystal chandeliers he had purchased with my mother's money. "It is a beautiful party," I continued, returning my gaze to his flushing face. "You put so much effort into stealing the spotlight tonight. I simply would not miss the keynote presentation for the world. I want to see exactly how this ends." He opened his mouth to scream another order at the guards, his hands shaking with blind rage. He was entirely focused on my destruction, completely unaware of the heavy tactical boots currently surrounding the outer hallway. The heavy oak doors of the Empire Room did not merely open. They were violently thrust apart with a concussive, shattering force that rattled the brass hinges and sent a shockwave through the polished floorboards. The two hotel security guards, who were reaching for my shoulders, instantly froze, their hands hovering in mid-air as their heads snapped toward the grand entrance. The jazz quartet stopped abruptly, a discordant, high-pitched screech of a saxophone echoing into the sudden, suffocating silence. Through the massive entryway poured a relentless, overwhelming tide of federal authority. Dozens of agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, flooded the lavish ballroom. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized military precision that immediately established absolute, undeniable dominance over the entire room. "Federal agents, nobody move, secure all the exits right now," a commanding, thunderous voice boomed over the terrified crowd. Teams of agents rapidly dispersed along the perimeter walls, physically blocking every single exit, including the heavy steel service doors leading to the catering kitchens. The high society guests, the local politicians, and the wealthy corporate investors who had just been sipping premium champagne and laughing at Ryan's charismatic jokes now shrank back in sheer, unadulterated terror. Women gasped loudly, clutching their expensive diamond jewelry. Men raised their hands defensively in the air, dropping their crystal glasses onto the floor. The carefully constructed illusion of untouchable elite privilege evaporated in a matter of seconds, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of a coordinated federal raid. I turned my attention entirely back to my husband. The physical transformation of his face was an absolute masterpiece of poetic justice. The flushed, screaming arrogance that had possessed him just moments ago completely vanished, drained away in a millisecond to leave a sickening, translucent, pale shade of absolute panic. His jaw went completely slack. His eyes widened to an impossible degree, darting wildly around the room as his brain desperately tried to process the tactical vests, the heavy radios, and the overwhelming presence of the United States government crashing his perfect launch party. He took a stumbling, uncoordinated step backward, his expensive Italian dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. He looked at me, a profound, horrifying realization finally clicking into place behind his panicked eyes. He realized in that exact moment that I was not a broken, hysterical woman crashing his party in a manic episode. I was the bait standing perfectly still, keeping him perfectly distracted while the federal trap slammed shut around his neck. The crowd parted violently, stumbling over each other to get out of the way, as the lead tactical agent marched directly toward the center of the ballroom where we stood. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern, unforgiving face, flanked by two heavily armed IRS agents. Ryan raised his trembling hands, palms facing outward in a pathetic gesture of frantic surrender. "There must be some massive mistake here," Ryan stammered, his smooth, practiced public relations baritone cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. "I am Ryan Preston. I am hosting a private corporate event for my agency. You have the wrong venue." The lead agent did not slow his aggressive pace. He stopped less than 2 feet away from Ryan, invading his personal space with absolute crushing authority. "Ryan Preston," the agent stated, his voice ringing out clearly across the dead-silent ballroom, ensuring every single guest heard his next words. "You are under arrest." Before Ryan could even process the sentence, chaos erupted near the stage. Brittany, who had been attempting to quietly slip behind the massive ice sculpture, let out a piercing, terrified shriek. Two IRS agents moved swiftly toward her, grabbing her bare arms and spinning her around roughly. The champagne flute she was holding slipped from her grasp, shattering violently on the marble floor. "Let go of me right now! I did not do anything wrong. I am just the founder of this company," she screamed, her carefully constructed image dissolving into a messy, mascara-stained panic. The agents completely ignored her frantic protests, swiftly securing her wrists behind her back with heavy metal handcuffs. The sharp metallic click of the locking mechanism echoed sharply through the room. The lead FBI agent turned his full, intimidating attention back to Ryan. He pulled a folded federal warrant from his tactical vest and held it up directly in front of Ryan's face. "Ryan Preston, you are being placed under federal arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you by the state." Ryan was physically shaking now, his entire body trembling uncontrollably as the flanking agent grabbed his arms and secured his wrists in heavy cuffs. "What are the charges? You cannot do this to me tonight." Ryan sobbed, his towering narcissistic ego completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The senior IRS agent stepped forward, holding the blue binder my father and I had meticulously prepared that very morning. "You are being officially charged with multiple federal counts of interstate wire fraud, federal document forgery, and massive corporate tax evasion," the agent announced loudly, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "We have secured these warrants based on irrefutable digital evidence of your embezzlement of medical escrow funds, the forgery of residential property mortgages, and the illegal laundering of said stolen capital through this fraudulent corporate entity, Ascend Public Relations." The collective gasp from the ballroom was deafening. The investors Ryan had been desperately courting stared at him with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Then a shrill, hysterical scream pierced the heavy air. Brenda pushed her way violently through the crowd. "Get your hands off my son! Do you know who we are? This is a terrible misunderstanding. It is her fault," Brenda shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "She is crazy. She set him up." An agent stepped squarely into Brenda's path, holding up a firm hand. "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice," the agent warned coldly. Brenda froze in her tracks, bursting into loud, ugly tears as she helplessly watched her golden child being paraded in front of Chicago's elite in handcuffs. I took one final slow sip of my premium champagne, offering Ryan a chilling nod of absolute farewell right now. The federal agents did not hesitate for a single second after my chilling farewell. They grabbed Ryan roughly by the shoulders and forcefully spun him toward the massive oak doors of the ballroom. His expensive Italian leather shoes dragged against the polished marble floor as he desperately tried to dig his heels in. The sheer humiliation of the perp walk was absolute. Hundreds of the most influential corporate executives and high society investors in Chicago stood in stunned silence, watching the golden boy of public relations being hauled away like a common street criminal. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably ahead of him, her carefully applied makeup completely ruined, as female agents escorted her out into the hallway. Suddenly, Brenda lunged forward, breaking through the line of stunned guests. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure aristocratic rage. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at the lead federal agent. "You listen to me right now," Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You absolutely cannot do this. We are the Preston family. We have the best defense attorneys in the entire state of Illinois on retainer. I will personally post his bail tonight using the family estate. I will put up the entire northern suburbs mansion to get my son out of that jail cell before midnight. You are making a massive mistake, and I will see you fired for this outrage." The federal agent simply stared at her, completely unfazed by her pathetic display of wealth and privilege. But before the agent could even respond, a deep, commanding voice echoed from the shadows near the grand entrance. My father Thomas stepped into the bright light of the ballroom. He wore his classic black tuxedo, exuding the effortless authority of a man who had spent his entire life putting arrogant criminals behind bars. He walked directly toward Brenda, his footsteps echoing with absolute finality. "You will not be posting bail with that estate, Brenda," my father stated, his voice cold and unwavering. Brenda spun around, glaring at him. "Excuse me, Thomas, what are you even talking about?" she demanded, crossing her arms defensively. My father calmly reached into his tailored jacket pocket and withdrew a pristine, folded piece of legal paper. It was a certified copy of the document Ryan had so eagerly signed on the hood of the sports car during the barbecue. He held it out to her. Brenda snatched it from his hands, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. My father did not wait for her to finish reading. He delivered the final crushing blow verbally. When Ryan signed that acknowledgement of debt, he did not just assume personal liability for the fraudulent mortgage he took out on my house, my father explained loudly, ensuring everyone in the room heard the truth. To secure the massive illegal loans for his shell company, your brilliant son used your family estate as collateral. He signed away the deed to your mansion to fund his mistress and her fake public relations firm. Because those funds are now officially classified as the proceeds of federal wire fraud and money laundering, the United States government is seizing your home tonight. You do not own that estate anymore, Brenda. You are completely bankrupt. Brenda read the signature at the bottom of the page. All the color instantly drained from her face. The paper slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the marble floor. She let out a horrific, gut-wrenching wail and collapsed onto her knees in the center of the ballroom, completely destroyed by the boundless greed of her own son. Ryan stopped struggling against the federal agents. He turned his head, looking at his mother sobbing on the floor, and then he looked at me. The absolute reality of his total destruction finally crushed his towering narcissistic ego. I was losing his freedom, his firm, his reputation, and the family wealth, all in one single catastrophic night. He looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. He tried to pull away from the agent stumbling toward me. "Claire, please," Ryan begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please, you have to tell them to stop. You have to help me, Claire. Please, I am your husband." I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing merely inches away from his sweating, panicked face. I looked directly into his eyes, letting him see the cold, calculated forensic accountant who had meticulously engineered his downfall. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper meant only for him. "You told me to put you before my mother." "Ryan," I whispered, the words cutting through the air like a surgical blade. "So I did exactly what you asked. I put you right at the very top of the priority list of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Have fun in federal prison." I stepped back, giving the agents a curt nod. They shoved him forward, marching him out of the ballroom and into the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers waiting on the downtown street below. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, ending his reign of terror forever. 1 year later, the afternoon sun shone brightly over a beautiful new medical facility in downtown Chicago. I stood on a raised platform holding an oversized pair of golden scissors. A massive crowd of supporters, medical professionals, and journalists gathered around me, smiling and clapping. The sign above the building read, "The Eleanor Foundation for Advanced Cancer Support." Ryan was rightfully convicted on all federal charges and sentenced to 15 long years in prison. He lost everything. Nia is now the lead legal counsel for my foundation. We stood together watching the crowd cheer as I finally cut the red ribbon. I am 33 years old, thriving, wealthy, and absolutely untouchable. I lost my mother, but I found my true power, and she is smiling. The story of Claire's meticulous and triumphant takedown of her narcissistic husband Ryan offers a profound lesson on the power of composure in the face of profound betrayal. When we are deeply hurt by those closest to us, our initial instinct is often to react emotionally, to scream, cry, or demand immediate answers. However, Claire teaches us that true strength often lies in silence and strategic boundaries. Ryan desperately wanted to provoke a hysterical reaction to validate his false narrative that she was unstable. By refusing to give him the emotional ammunition he sought, Claire protected her peace and maintained her clarity. She channeled her grief and shock into calculated, decisive action. This is a vital lesson for anyone dealing with toxic or manipulative relationships. You do not owe a manipulator a front row seat to your pain. Furthermore, the narrative underscores the importance of knowing your own worth and refusing to be defined by someone else's disrespect. Ryan tried to gaslight Claire into believing she was powerless, hoping to cage her legally and emotionally. Instead of internalizing his toxic projections, she leaned into her expertise, her support system, and her unwavering sense of reality. She proved that when someone tries to rewrite your story to make themselves the hero, you have the ultimate power to hold the pen. Taking back your control doesn't require matching their chaos. It requires the quiet, unshakable resolve to walk away with your dignity intact. Ultimately, we learned that surviving betrayal is not just about escaping a bad situation. It is about rebuilding your foundation on your own terms, surrounded only by those who truly respect you. Have you ever had to maintain your composure while setting a difficult boundary with someone toxic? Let me know your experiences in the comments below.